It was past midnight at the central bank in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. Bank Director Salif Kabore held in his hands the signed decree that would initiate the largest financial operation in Burkina Faso's history. This document contained orders to immediately freeze assets totaling $200 million, belonging to 27 foreign companies operating in the country. This order, given by Captain Ibrahim Traore, was not just a financial measure, it was the result of a secret investigation. Thus, companies had been systematically plundering Burkina Faso for years through systematic tax evasion, transfer pricing, manipulation, and covert attacks on financial resources. Within the next 6 hours, CEOs of these companies working in offices worldwide would face the biggest financial shock in history. Accounting departments in Paris, London, and Toronto would be in panic. Emergency legal interventions would begin, and a 72-hour crisis would erupt in international diplomacy. The origins of this operation had begun 6 months earlier. Burkina Faso financial intelligence had discovered a strange anomaly during a routine tax audit. The profits declared by large companies engaged in gold mining did not match the amount of gold they produced. The math was simple. Monthly production of 2 tons of gold was declared, but 3.5 tons of gold sales to the international gold market had been detected. Where 1.5 tons of gold went was unknown. This meant $90 million in hidden income monthly for just one company when Finance Minister Dr. Rozan Coulibaly reported this finding to Traore. The dimensions of the situation became clearer. Mr. President, this is not limited to gold mining only. Cotton, uranium, oil, the same manipulation exists in all sectors. Thus, companies are systematically plundering Burkina Faso. She had said this statement deeply affected Traore because protecting the country's resources was his most fundamental principle. The secret investigation was conducted by the Financial Intelligence Unit. The operation was given the code name Golden Shield. For 3 months, companies' financial records, bank accounts, international transfers, and even employees' private communications were examined. The results were shocking. 27 companies were evading a total of $800 million in taxes annually. This figure was equivalent to 40% of Burkina Faso's annual budget. The methods used by the companies were extremely sophisticated. Transfer pricing manipulation was the most common. For example, a gold extracting company would sell its produced gold to its own parent company at 30% below market value. Then the parent company would sell this gold at real market price. The difference was profit siphoned from Burkina Faso. The second method was fake costs. Companies made money transfers to their parent companies through items like consulting services, patent usage, technical support that they never actually performed. This way, profits in Burkina Faso were reduced to zero and no taxes were paid. The third and most insidious method was the double accounting system. These companies gave one set of figures to Burkina Faso tax authorities and another set to their parent companies. Only parent companies knew the real profits. Faced with these findings, Traore was confronted with 2 choices: either negotiate with companies through diplomatic channels or take harsh financial measures. The diplomatic route could take years and had no guarantee of results. Harsh measures could create an international crisis but would yield quick results. Traore's decision was clear. Thus, companies deceived Burkina Faso. Now it's time to pay the price. This decision was not only financial, but also a matter of national sovereignty. No country should turn a blind eye to the theft of its own resources. The planning of the operation was done with military precision. First, it was determined which companies would have how much of their assets frozen. This calculation was based on the taxes they evaded, penalty, interest, and compensation. Total amount, $23.7 million. The second phase was preparing the legal infrastructure. The operation needed to comply with international law. The Ministry of Justice prepared justifications for tax evasion, charges, and damage to financial resources. Separate files were created for each company. The third phase was coordination. Central bank, commercial banks, customs administration, tax office. All relevant institutions were synchronized. The operation would take place simultaneously so that companies could not move their assets elsewhere. Fourth phase was security measures. there was a possibility that company executives would try to leave the country during the operation. Additional security was taken at airports and border crossings. The operation began at 00:01 on the night of March 15, 2024. The first target was Northern Star Resources, the largest gold mining company. This Canadian company had $67 million in its BurkinaFaso accounts. By order of the central bank, this money was immediately frozen. At the same time, other companies' accounts were also being frozen, one by one. French oil company, Total Energies, $23 million. British telecommunications company, Millicom's $18 million. American mining company, Newmont's $31 million. The list went on and on. The most critical moment of the operation was at 6 a.m. at this time. Company headquarters in Europe were starting their business day and beginning to check financial reports. The first shockwave came from Northern Star's headquarters in Toronto. The company's CEO, Michael Anderson, was expecting a routine morning report when he received an urgent call from the financial manager. "Sir, all our accounts in BurkinaFaso have been frozen. We cannot access $67 million. This news shocked Anderson. His first reaction was to think this was an error. However, within the next hour, similar calls began coming to all companies: Total Energies' Paris headquarters, Millicom's Luxembourg office, Newmont's Denver headquarters. The same panic was being experienced everywhere. The first reactions were legal intervention. Companies activated emergency law firms, international arbitration, diplomatic intervention, pressure groups. Every avenue was tried. However, Traore's preparation was perfect. All legal justifications were ready. The Burkina Faso Ministry of Justice made an official statement the same day. These companies are under investigation for systematic tax evasion and financial manipulation crimes. Asset freezing is to protect profits obtained from crime. The statement resonated greatly in international media. Financial Times announced the news with the headline, "Blow to multinational companies from Burkina Faso." Reuters used the headline, "$200 million asset crisis." Bloomberg made the comment, "Financial war from Africa." On the second day, diplomatic reactions began. The Canadian Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced that it found the situation unacceptable. French President Emmanuel Macron's spokesperson called for a friendly solution. The British Prime Minister also expressed concerns. Faced with these reactions, Traore maintained his determined stance. In a press conference held, he said, "Companies that steal Burkina's resources will pay the price. This is a matter of justice." On the third day, companies began trying different strategies. Some requested direct meetings with Burkina Faso officials. Some sought reconciliation by claiming there was a misunderstanding. Some reacted harshly, threatening to withdraw their investments. The most interesting reaction came from Northern Star. The company made a statement saying, "We are open to cooperation with Burkina Faso," and announced its readiness to sit at the negotiation table. This approach became an example for other companies. On the fourth day, the first reconciliation signals began to arrive. Total Energies announced its readiness to review past period tax calculations. Millicom requested negotiation with a promise of transparent cooperation. This development showed that Traore's strategy was working. The arm was not to punish companies, but to force them to pay fair taxes. Asset freezing had provided negotiating power in this regard. On the fifth day, the first official negotiation began. Northern Star's senior executives came to Ouagadougou. The company agreed to re-examine tax declarations from the past 5 years. The negotiation process was complex. While the company claimed there were unintentional errors, Burkina Faso maintained its insistence on systematic manipulation. Eventually, a middle ground was found. The company would pay $45 million as additional tax and penalty, and the remaining $22 million of assets would be released. This agreement became an example for other companies. Total Energies agreed to make a similar agreement with $12 million in additional payment. Millicom paid $8 million. One by one, companies sat at the negotiation table. 6 weeks later, the balance sheet of the operation was drawn up. 19 of the 27 companies had chosen the reconciliation path. Total additional tax and penalty payment, $127 million. This figure was a great gain for the Burkina Faso budget. The remaining 8 companies continued to maintain a harsh attitude. These companies' assets remained frozen until a court decision was made. The legal process continued in international arbitration. The long-term effects of the operation was significant. First, a permanent increase in BurkinaFaso's tax revenues was achieved. Companies began making more careful tax declarations. Tax evasion risks were significantly reduced. Second, BurkinaFaso's international prestige increased. Other African countries requested consultancy for similar operations. Ghana, Mali, Senegal, many countries studied the BurkinaFaso model. The behavior of multinational companies in Africa changed. Tax optimization strategies were reviewed. More transparent business policies began to be adopted. A year later, the full impact of the operation was understood. Burkina Faso's tax revenues had increased by 23%. Most of this increase came from the direct and indirect effects of the Golden Shield operation. More importantly, the operation had increased the confidence of the Burkina Faso people. The perception that our government can stand against big companies had settled. This situation strengthened national unity and trust in the state. Important developments also occurred internationally. The OECD began showing Burkina Faso as an example in fighting tax evasion. The World Bank evaluated the operation as successful in terms of fiscal sovereignty. 2 years later, most legal processes were concluded. Most of the companies had reconciled with Burkina Faso. Only 3 companies had to accept their losses. In international arbitration, the most important result of the operation was its deterrent effect. Other multinational companies began taking Burkina Faso risk into account when making tax planning. This situation significantly increased tax compliance. Traore, in his evaluation on the 2nd anniversary of the operation, said $200 million was not just a number. This was a struggle for Burkina Faso's economic sovereignty. The money we won brought back the honor we lost. The academic dimension of the operation was also interesting. A case study titled Tax Sovereignty of Developing Countries was prepared at Harvard Business School. The operation became an example of how small countries can fight against large companies. The financial dimension was also noteworthy. Most of the additional $127 million obtained was transferred to education and health investments. 50 new schools were built. 20 health centers were modernized. Thus, investments increased public support for the operation. Perhaps the most valuable result of the operation was its impact on the young generation. University students began experiencing the pride that Burkina Faso does not bow to big companies. This situation reduced brain drain and increased young people's motivation to stay in the country. In such, the technological dimension also led to important developments. The Financial Intelligence Unit began exporting tax audit software developed during the operation to other countries. This software gained international recognition under the brand Burkina Faso Financial Technologies. In the 3rd year, the ripple effect of the operation spread throughout Africa. Ghana collected $89 million in additional taxes with a similar operation. Senegal, $76 million. Mali, $45 million. These figures showed the dimensions of the Burkina Faso effect. Multinational companies also adapted to the situation. They began establishing more transparent accounting systems in African operations. Local compliance departments were strengthened. Tax optimization strategies were reviewed. In the 4th year, the operation had completely become routine. Faso's tax audit system had become one of the most effective systems in Africa. Tax evasion rates had decreased by 80%. The diplomatic dimension of the operation had also created permanent changes. Burkina Faso had become a leading country in international tax cooperation. Burkina Faso's views on tax issues were valued in the OECD, G20, and African Union. In the 5th year, the operation had entered international literature as financial sovereignty. Operation? It was being taught in economics faculties in tax strategies of developing countries courses. Traore, in his speech on the 5th anniversary, emphasized the philosophical dimension of the operation. This operation carried a meaning beyond money. We declared to the world that Burkina Faso's resources belong to the people of Burkina Faso. Today, traces of the operation can be seen everywhere in Burkina Faso. Schools, hospitals, roads built with resources obtained from the operation. All are concrete fruits of the Golden Shield operation. The most important legacy was mental transformation. The Burkina Faso people broke the belief that big companies cannot be opposed. The understanding that even if we are right, settled. This transformation was the most valuable gain for the country's future. The behind-the-scenes story of the operation was also noteworthy. Traure's personal experience was influential in his bold decision. As a young officer, he had witnessed his father's cotton field being forcibly bought by a foreign company under unfair conditions. Since that day, the thought that foreign companies are exploiting Burkina Faso had settled in his mind. One of the most critical moments of the operation was when Total Energy's senior executive tried to threaten Traore by calling him directly. The company's high manager had said in the phone conversation, "The consequences of this decision will be very severe." Traore's answer had been clear. Companies that steal Burkina Faso's resources must face the consequences. The International Finance Corporation's IFC Africa director had made an urgent visit to Ouagadougou on the third day of the operation. The aim was to convince Traore. However, in the 2-hour meeting, Traore had explained companies' tax evasion methods with mathematical evidence, silencing the IFC manager. The financial monitoring system used in the technological dimension of the operation had attracted great interest. This system, developed using digital tracking technology, could track companies' financial movements in real time. The system was so effective that neighboring countries requested cooperation to develop similar technology. One of the most dramatic moments occurred in Northern Star's Burkina Faso general manager's office. When he learned that assets were frozen, he reacted violently, shouting, "This is unacceptable." However, 24 hours later, the report he received from company lawyers showed him the truth. Burkina Faso was legally right. The social media dimension of the operation was also impressive. The hashtag number, signed Burkina Faso Justice, received 350 tweets within 48 hours. Support messages poured in from the African diaspora. Comments like, "Finally," an African leader said, "Stop to big companies," went viral. A renowned economist article in the Financial Times brought academic prestige to the operation. Burkina Faso is implementing a new model that will break the resource curse. This article evaluated the operation not just as tax collection, but as a development strategy. The least known detail of the operation was the role of Traure's wife, Dr. Arua. His wife, who was an economist, was the first person to notice transfer pricing manipulations. In their discussions at home, she had said, "These companies are stealing our money." "Ibrahim, don't you realize?" These words had been the trigger for Traore to start the secret investigation. In the 6th month of the operation, an unexpected development occurred. One of the companies with frozen assets initiated international arbitration against Burkina Faso. However, the arbitration court decided in favor of Burkina Faso. The court president rejected the company's request with the justification that sovereign states' right to collect taxes is indisputable. This decision strengthened the international legal foundation of the operation. It set a precedent for other African countries. The president of Tanzania announced that he was starting a similar operation with the statement, "The Burkina Faso way is our way to." One of the most beautiful results was the area of use of the money recovered through the operation. 60% of the 127 million obtained was spent on education, 30% on health, and 10% on infrastructure. This transparency further increased public support for the operation. Comments like, "Our money is finally being used in the right place," were frequently heard on the street. In conclusion, Traure's $200 million asset freezing operation was not just a financial transaction. It was the turning point of Burkina Faso's economic sovereignty struggle. The Golden Shield operation had become a turning point in Africa's economic liberation struggle and a symbol of Traore's visionary leadership.